When we picture the Chazon Ish, I don't think we usually envision the Chazon Ish going to a natural science museum and exploring different animals and skeletons of sea creatures. We don't usually think of Reb Chaim Kanievsky or Reb Yoshev or any of the great names of Gedolim that we're familiar with. It's hard to imagine them having an interest, having an intrigue, having a curiosity in some of the exhibits and some of the other things that we explore and that we might find interest in. However, I think more often than not we have a very narrow picture of what a Gadol is and how they achieve their greatness. The goal tonight, our second discussion on the Chida, is going to focus on broadening our construct of Avodas Hashem. The Chida tells us he has a Sefer Pesach Einayim, where he has a commentary on many places in Shas, including Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us, Kachi darka shel Torah. This is the way to acquire Torah. Pas b'melach tochal mayim l'shura tishta. You eat a little bit of bread with salt. You drink a small amount of water. V'ala aretz tishan v'chayet sar tichya. And you sleep on the ground and you live a life of discomfort. The simple understanding of this Mishnah is that in order to acquire Torah, you have to put yourself through this level of suffering. I have to abstain from the physical world in order to connect with Torah. Writes the Chida in the Pesach Einayim, he says, the way to understand this Mishnah is actually a little bit different. The Mishnah is not telling you the way to acquire Torah is by making sure I only eat a little bit of bread with salt and drinking a small measure of water. Rather, what the Mishnah is saying is that the indication that my love and my thirst for Torah is so overwhelming, ki kol kach yeh cheshko godol v'nimratz b'Torah, u'lerov cheshko lo yodeh le'echo v'lo lishon. Because I'm so invested, I'm so engaged, I'm so obsessed with Torah, I don't think about eating as much. I don't think about what exactly I'm having for dinner or where I'm sleeping. Ki kol libo v'daito b'Torah memela. Since my whole mind is preoccupied with Torah, im yizke lezeh, if I get to this madrega of connection, then bli shum machriach, without trying to avoid gashmias, naturally, yimsa diyochel ma'at pas b'melach ma'at mayim. Naturally, I'm not going to be so engaged and so indulged in the physical world because I'm just focused like a laser in my limud haTorah. Lo sheyasenu lesigu rak me'avoso v'cheshko b'Torah. I'm not restricting myself as a way of causing discomfort, but memela automatically, I'm not going to be so involved with the Gashmias when I'm super connected with Ruchnias. Ki achoshek ledavar echad gorim lehoser daito mikol shar devarim. When I'm so obsessed with one thing, everything else becomes secondary. Then he has an interesting line. We're going to focus on this more next time. He says, when a person gets to this level of constant obsession with Torah, oz vadai haTorah tegala sisreha lo. That's when the Torah reveals its secrets to you. So the Chida is reframing the Mishnah. It's not telling us we have to put ourselves through suffering in order to acquire Torah, but it is telling us, Kachi darku shel Torah, we have to be so invested and so obsessed with my limud haTorah I don't have time for anything else. The Chida elsewhere, in one of his smaller Svarim, Tzipor and Shamir, he says, Mishayesh lo leiv, a person who has a heart, Yisorer mitardema, he should awaken from his slumber, V'yasov b'Torah b'simcha, and to learn Torah with joy. Kasher yuchal, as much as possible. V'lo yotzi zman ha'yokar mipninim, and don't use your time that's more precious than diamonds. B'hav le'olam hazeh, in the futilities of this world. Yasok b'Torah b'simcha, learn Torah with joy. Don't waste your precious time with anything else. Now, these ideas are not surprising. These seem to be par for the course of developing real greatness. My sole focus, my obsession, my passion in life is Torah, knowing that Torah is my connection with Hashem. The Mishnah seems to say this as well. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Hamahalich b'derech v'shona. Rabbi Shimon says, if you're walking, you're traveling, and you're makayim the mitzvah of lechtecha b'derech, you're thinking as you're traveling, you're learning, umafsik mimishnaso v'omer, but then you stop your learning and you say, Ma no ilon zeh, wow, look at how cool that tree is. Uma no nir zeh, or look at that plowed field, that is gorgeous. If a person does that, Mala lava kosav kilu mischayu benafsho, the Torah considers it as if I am obligated in my life. Mischayu benafsho. What did I do wrong? I was mahalich b'derech v'shona. I was traveling and I was learning. Says the Mishnah, how dare you stop and do anything else? I'm analyzing the tree. I'm enjoying the world around me. No, hamafsik mishnoso mischayiv benafsho. Now I'll share with you parenthetically, if you look at the Pesach Enayim, the Chida's commentary on this Mishnah, he does not get into the understanding of what the Mishnah is telling us. But here's a classic insight into the scholarship and the research of the Chida. He says, he first starts off by quoting the Tosfos Yontif, the great disciple of the Maral. He says the Tosfos Yontif writes that really the proper text should not be Rabbi Shimon Omer, instead it should be Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov being the father of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The Tosfos Yontif explains the reason why that should be the proper girsa is because Reb Shimon, we already had mentioned earlier on in Pirkei Avos. And it would be strange to mention another comment of Reb Shimon in a different place. Usually we group the teachings of one Tana together. And then the Tosfos Yontif says, we have Reb Meir coming up in the Mishnah after Reb Shimon. And we know, based on the introduction of the Rambam, that Reb Meir actually came before Reb Shimon. So clearly this can't be Reb Shimon, it has to be Reb Yaakov. That's the Tosfos Yontif. The Chida says, V'imo haslicha. I beg forgiveness from the Tosfos Yontif. It's not his fault he made this mistake. But the proper girsa is Reb Shimon. And Reb Meir didn't come before Reb Shimon like the Gemara in Yevamos tells us. The famous Gemara of Rabbi Akiva developing his 5 new Talmidim. It's clear from the Gemara in Yevamos Samach Beis that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and Reb Meir were together in the same Tekufa, in the same time period. The Tosfos Yontif, was bringing a source from the introduction of the Rambam, where the Rambam seems to say that Reb Meir came before Reb Shimon. Says the Chida, that's a mistaken girsa. I found that girsa, but that's a mistake. I found the proper text of the Rambam, and he doesn't say it like that. So close parentheses, but just an insight into one of the hundreds of thousands of ha'oras, of observations of the Chida when it comes to just the purity of scholarship. Here's one example of a gadol that we were zocha to be familiar with, who lived in our time, who many of the stories and the little we know about his inner world, right? The inner world of Rabbi Yashiv we know nothing about. But at least the commentary of those who were close with him, the ongoing theme of Rabbi Yashiv was his unwavering hasmada. He was always engrossed in learning. It's interesting because he also had a love and an appreciation for nigunim. He loved the music. He loved melodies. When the children were going up around the Shabbos table, he would always ask, "Did you hear any new nigunim this week? Share them with me." Never did a Shabbos meal go by without several beautiful zmiros and nigunim. During the week, the grandchildren eventually had the idea, if we walk around the home and we sing new nigunim, we're not going to interrupt him while he's learning, but that was a way of them sharing their new melodies with their grandfather. And then a couple days would go by, and then they would hear Rabbi Yashiv reading Gemara using one of those new melodies. Forgive me. At any simcha, the family would get together. Rabbi Yashiv would always ask, "Nu, anigin, l'chaim." He was zocheh to have hundreds of grandchildren coming when they were engaged during Chol HaMoed and other times, and he would always ask for a niggin. However, his love of music never got in the way of his diligence in learning. Story that's told about Rabbi Yashiv when he was 23 years old. This is going back to 1933. Yosela Rosenblatt, who was known as the king of Chazanim, was visiting Yerushalayim, and he was going to lead the tefillah in the Churva Shul in the Old City. There were throngs of people excited, waiting to hear live from Yosela Rosenblatt. And Rabbi Yashiv himself had in mind to go to benefit and enjoy the talent. However, as he was walking, there was this inner turmoil that began to develop within him, and he began to rethink his decision, and immediately turned around and went back to the Beis Medrash. A story like this is what we commonly associate Gedolei Yisrael. Nothing comes in the way of learning. There is an exception. There is an exception to the rule we find in the Rambam and the Shmona Parakim. The Rambam, in the 5th parak of the Shmona Parakim, he speaks about the ideal of channeling all of our kochos towards one goal, and that one goal is Hasagas Hashem Yisborach, knowledge and closeness with the Creator of the universe. And my intent in everything and anything I do should not be my own enjoyment or my own pleasure. Obviously, Baruch Hashem, there's so much of life that's rich and enjoyable, but ideally, every move, every conversation, every decision I make should be bringing me closer to that one goal of Hasagas Hashem. However, the Rambam says, sometimes if a person isn't feeling well, physically or emotionally, then it would be appropriate to focus more on some of the physical pleasures of this world. And he gives the following example. Im tisora lo v'lecha shechora. If a person is struggling with depression, Yasira b'shmiyas hanigunim u'b'minei zemer. Here are some good ideas to help get into a better mood. Listening to music, v'hatiyol beganos, walking in orchards, v'binyamin noyim, seeing beautiful buildings, chevras hatsuros hayofos u'kayotze bezeh, or looking at statues, paintings, these types of things, mimma sheyarchiv hanefesh, things that could expand the spirit, v'yoser hamara hashchara mimena, and relieve someone from feeling in a dark mood. This is one exception we find in the Rambam. If you're feeling depressed, then listen to music, go to the museum, enjoy some paintings, but otherwise, just focus on that one goal of coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now here's where it gets interesting. Throughout the many different areas of the diary of the Chida, when he's recording his journeys and his interactions, the emotional roller coaster of the years that he was traveling as a shliach d'Rabbanan, there are so many times he comments on the physical beauty that he was enamored with, that he was taken by, the intrigue and the depth of curiosity and value that the Chida seems to place on things that we would probably define as very superficial, physical. They're distractions that could take one away from the Ikar of Avodas Hashem. But yet we find there's an ongoing theme where the Chida feels that it's worthwhile not only spending time exploring some of these places and these experiences, but also making sure to record them. Let's go through a couple together. Page 5, we have what seems to be a museum of natural history of sorts, and the Chida writes at great length, Sham kol minei shratzim v'ofos v'dogim v'chayos v'nechashim v'akrovim, all these different types of animals and birds and fish and snakes and scorpions. Kulam chanutim. Chanutim means that they were killed and they were mummified. Gam behemos gedolos, and there were also these massive animals. Umamelin oron betevin, their flesh was filled up with straw, and they looked as if they were alive. Gam kol minei toloyim minei arba, different types of insects and grasshoppers. And then he speaks about the gemstones. There was an amazing magnet, this massive force, and there were even anashim. There were shnei anashim chanutim v'nasu mumia. There were two human beings that were embalmed, and they were made into mummies. And I saw yad shel eit shenases lechaser yad. I saw a prosthetic arm that's made for someone who doesn't have his own. V'haya mishtamish ba kamo yodo b'chol, and it could be used as a real arm and a hand for everything that he needs. I saw rubies and sapphire, and he goes on to list all these different types of stones. In a different passage, the Chida says, speaking about another type of museum that he was visiting, Yesham cheder mole tsuros anashim v'nashim shel shayish. There was this room that was filled with marble statues of men and women. V'tsuros ophos torfei adam. And there were images, there were statues of these massive birds that could even eat a human being. V'tsuros nashim balos milchama, devarim mavhilim. There were pictures and statues of women warriors. Suros anokim shel shayish lehafli, giant pillars, giant statues. In one place he speaks about seeing a peacock for the first time in his life. And he describes it with great detail. Its wings are more than 3 cubits in length, with patterns of color, and its body was blue. The crown of its head was dark blue, was deep blue. May his name be blessed. And then he says something even more intriguing. Meir Avigo, someone he met along the way, showed me a picture of, what does that stand for? SH period, TS period. Shabtai Tzvi. A splendid and very beautiful picture with his black beard at one side and a crown and a trumpet on the other. Now, was the Chida a fan of Shabtai Tzvi and his movement? Definitely not. It's very clear from many sources, many first-hand sources, that the Chida was opposed to the movement of Shabtai Tzvi, but yet he's commenting on how beautiful this picture was. Now the truth is, even the statues that he saw, many of those statues, if you were to ask the question, can I, as a Jew, make that statue? The answer likely, depending on what kind of statue it is, the answer would be, no, it's asur. You might even be in violation of an isur deraisa. It reminds me of one of the mashgichim of Slobodka. He was walking with Talmidim somewhere in the streets of Europe, Kovna, and there was a paper posted from the Maskilim speaking about how backwards and primitive, old-fashioned Orthodox Judaism is, and how it's time for a change, basically bashing the establishment of Orthodox Judaism. And the Mashgiach of Slobodka was standing there, reading this proclamation, and the Talmidim were wondering, what's he going to do? He reads the whole thing and he says, wow, that was written very eloquently. And then he tears it down and throws it in the garbage. It's not a contradiction. I could appreciate an aspect of something. I could see the artistic value in something, even if I don't necessarily agree with what's being said. In this case, the Chida was not a follower or a fan of Shabtai Tzvi, but the portrait was beautiful. One more example, the Chida went to visit a university. And in this particular place of higher study, they had a medical department, and there was a plaza where the crown of medicine would be given, meaning that one would get their degree. It was a grand building with beautiful pictures and gardens and walls. In front of the stairway, there's a picture of a woman who had studied and was crowned with the crown of medicine. Up the stairs to the right is an elegant and beautiful room with cabinets all around, stones of every kind. There's a plaque below each one describing what the stone is, where it's found, from what country it comes from, and so on. There are more cabinets and areas to explore, where they have embalmed embryos and birds and fish of every sort and every color, and pearls and corals of many kinds, and various crystals for the study of science. And everything is so well arranged and organized. I saw there an entire whale. In the room opposite is where the Jews received the crown of medicine. Why did the Jews receive their medicine degree in a different room? Because they wouldn't take the Hippocratic Oath, which goes back to the Greek mythology and speaking about the gods of healing. Jews did not feel comfortable doing that, so they had a separate room to receive their degree. He concludes here, he says there were other areas of study. There were rows of seats where they would demonstrate surgery, and there were other rooms where they focused on different sciences, There was a raised place where the master would give lessons and benches in great number for the students. The buildings were beautiful with carved figures and walls of gardens of different types. He concludes speaking about this massive maze that he saw, an area for people to debate and converse. So, if classic Torah hashkafa is Kachi darko shel Torah, pas b'melech tochal, mayim b'meshura tishta, al ha'aretz tishon v'chayet sar tichya. Why is the Chida so enamored by all of these distractions? Was he the only one we find throughout history who had an interest in these types of things? And the answer is definitely not. Some of the greatest Gedolim that you would never picture having an intrigue for areas of life that don't seem directly connected with Limud HaTorah, but we find. Now obviously every person's going to be different, their own Techunas HaNefesh. Getting back to Rabbi Yosef for a moment, when he was learning pretty much the entirety of the day, who would help his wife take care of the children? His father-in-law. Who was his father-in-law? Rav Aryeh Levin, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim. So that means that Rav Aryeh Levin learned less hours of the day than Rabbi Yosef. So who was greater? They were different people. They had different missions in Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Yosef's tafkid was to sit and learn and become the Gadol Hador, the Posek Hador. Rav Aryeh Levin was also a tremendous Gadol in Torah, but he was following his Techunas HaNefesh, immersed in Chesed. So obviously personality plays a role in what we spend our time in and how we focus on that ultimate goal of coming closer to Hashem. But there's an interesting article getting somewhat more contemporary regarding Rav Kook. This article was written in the Jewish Chronicle. It's a British publication that goes back to September 13th, 1935. This was less than 2 weeks after Rav Kook passed away. Article was written by an artist, and he entitled this piece, Rabbi Kook on Art, Kosher Sculpture. He says, as an artist, I'm interested in the biblical prohibition of making graven images. That has had so much influence in the creation of Jewish art. One day, I had the opportunity to talk with the late Rabbi Kook about this prohibition. I asked him whether it is true that somewhere in our holy commentaries, there's a passage that says that under certain circumstances, sculpture is allowed to be done even by Jews. The rabbi thought about it. He said, let me see. And he pulled down a few volumes of the Gemara from the shelf, and he found one particular place, and he showed me. He said, now listen to what our sages say about your question. The author writes, I don't remember the exact wording that he quoted, but it was something like this. Our sages say, he read out loud, that it is allowed for Jews to make images if they are done imperfectly and maimed. This made me laugh. Why are you laughing, he asked. Well, in that case, I replied, I'm sure my sculpture is kosher. Why, he asked. Because my work is far from perfect. Now it was his turn to laugh. He was all kindness. We talked about art, and he told me the following story. This is Rav Kook telling this artist the following story. When I lived in London, I used to visit the National Gallery, and my favorite pictures were those of Rembrandt. I really think that Rembrandt was a tzaddik. Do you know what I thought of when I first saw Rembrandt's works? They reminded me of the Midrashic source that speaks about the initial creation of light that was so powerful and so vast that Hashem had to hide that light so the wicked wouldn't utilize it. and reserve it for the tzaddikim in the times of Mashiach. I feel, Rav Kook said, that Rembrandt was somehow able to tap into some of that light. What Rav Kook meant by this, I cannot tell you. What's intriguing, though, to me, is that Rav Kook was sharing with this fellow that he used to visit the National Gallery and appreciate works of art. So one way of understanding a personality like the Chida or a personality like Rav Kook would be, maybe they were just depressed often. And therefore, utilizing the Rambam, they had to take time out of their busy schedule and go to museums. I assume that's not the case. I assume there's something deeper. Rav Kook himself, in a paragraph in the Sefer Oros, he shed some light on seeing Elokus, on being able to experience godliness in many different facets of our daily life. Rav Kook writes, Sarech lahoros es haderech eich nichnosim el hatraklim. I want to share with you what I believe is the path, how to enter into the palace. Derech hashar, going through the gate, entering into the palace that he refers to as finding a life of meaning and connection. Hashar hu elokus hamisgala ba'olam. This gate is godliness that's revealed in the world. Where is this godliness revealed? So obviously every believing Jew would answer through the Torah. And that is the most tangible and accessible form and source of Elokus. However, Rav Kook says, you'll find an element of Elokus in everything if you analyze it and you appreciate it. B'chol yofyo v'hedro, throughout the world in all of its beauty and all of its splendor, b'chol ruach v'neshama, in every spirit and every soul, b'chol chai v'remes, in every source of life, b'chol tzemach u'parach, and anything that sprouts and grows, b'chol goy u'mamlacha, in every nation, in every kingdom, b'yam v'galyav, in the sea and its waves, in the laughter, b'kishronos kol siach, in the intellect of every conversation, b'rayonos kol sofer, in the thought and the heart of every scribe, of every author, b'dimyonos kol mishorer, in the imagination, in the aspiration of every singer, someone who's expressing their soul in song, ubehegionos kol choshev, and in the thought of anyone who's thinking. There you'll find elokus misgala ba'olam, godliness that's revealed in the world. Behargoshas kol margish, in the depth of feeling and emotion of every human being. Ubesaras gavura shel kol gibor, and in the storm of strength that resides within the warrior. In all of these different variety of places and people and sources of life, if you look at it properly, you could experience a locus. The Mishnah says, a mahalich b'derech v'shona, you're traveling and you're learning, umafsik mi mishnaso, and then you stop your learning and you say, ma no ilon zeh, wow, this tree is gorgeous. Look at this plowed field. Look at that mountain. Mischayiv benafsho. What did I do wrong? The Emunas Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Shapira Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Levracha, Hashem Yinkom Domov, he writes in the Emunas Yisrael Parshas V'Eschanan, he says the following interpretation of this Mishnah. The kavana of the Mishnah is, who's the author of the Mishnah again? Reb Shimon or Reb Yaakov? If you were to ask the Chida, the author of the Mishnah is Reb Shimon. The kavanah is shehu mafsik mi mishnoso elokus. If I'm traveling and I'm connected with godliness through my Torah, umabid rak al gashmius ha'ilan, and then I stop that and I look at the gashmius of the tree, va'al yofyov chitzoni, or its external beauty, lo al koach elokai ha'otzer b'kirbo hamasmid kiyumo, but I'm not taken by that godly spark within the tree, that's its source of life, that's a revelation of God. Bezehu mischayev benafsho. That's where I'm obligated with my life. Because benafsho maskeles shoefis tomid lahabit bepenimius hadavar. What my neshama is thirsting for is not to be distracted by superficialities, by chitzonius, by this, oh, that's so cool, that's so geschmack. Mischayev benafsho, because now you're stopping your locus, you're stopping that godly connection. Says the Emunas Yisrael, but if as I'm traveling and I'm learning and I'm chazering my mishnayos and whatever it is I have in my mind, I'm thinking of what the machlokas between the Rashba and the Ritva really is, and then I see something and I allow myself to be enamored by it, not superficially, not as a distraction from my godly connection, but a hamshacha, but a continuation of that godly connection. That's not mischayev benafsho. That's beautiful. When the Rambam tells us in Shmona Parakim that the times that you want to go to a concert, to the museum, to look at statues and other things, those are times when you're in a bad mood and you want to just get rid of those depressing feelings. That could be marchiv the nefesh, that could expand the soul and take away some of your anxiety. The Rambam's talking about when is it kedai, even superficially, to allow yourself to be involved with the world around you. Nothing too deep, nothing too meaningful. Yes, they are distractions, but sometimes those distractions can be healing. So when you need a refuah, that's when you pursue those distractions. I assume that when the Chida was taken, he was standing in awe of so many of these different places and binyanim and statues. It wasn't a superficial appreciation. The Chida was seeing the Tzelem Elokim, human ingenuity. He was seeing the neshama of the creators and the thought and the shira of the soul coming out as expressed in these different forms of art or these different forms of construction. The Chida didn't have to be depressed to go to the Museum of Natural History and Science. He was going there as a hamshacha, as a continuation of his deep devekis b'Hashem. And I assume Rav Kook was probably doing the same thing. When you could see a work of art and you could be thinking about the creator, Rembrandt, must have been a special human being, that means you're looking at something deeper than the picture. But I'm appreciating the human soul that's been shared through this work of art. I'll leave you with one story that the Chida speaks about of historic significance. One of the early creators of sign language, going back to the mid-1700s, was a man in Paris by the name of Jacob Pereira. Jacob Pereira was a Portuguese Jewish educator and academic, and he worked decades and decades with children who were born deaf and mute, teaching them and giving them the tools how to communicate. The Chida writes in his diary, it was the 12th of Av, Parshas Ekev, on a Sunday, when I came to the great city of Paris, and I went to the house of Jacob Pereira. I brought a letter of recommendation from Amsterdam, and I asked if he could find me lodging, and he did. Now, an astounding thing of wisdom did this Sir Jacob relate to me. With his wisdom and by exercise of his intellect, together with painstaking care, he had succeeded in taking a deaf mute, to whom the sages refer to as one who cannot hear, cannot speak from the womb, from conception, and bring him to a state of speaking whereby he could reply with his mouth to something they would ask him in writing. He could also write in his own hand in the French language and Lashon HaKodesh. And with his mouth he could read in the books of both languages, and he could understand the language of Tanakh. And this man was also competent. With his skillful hands, he was able to demonstrate letters and images, allowing this child and many children to communicate. Now with my own eyes I saw in his house a young boy. They told me that he was mute, neither hearing or speaking from birth. And I saw him talk to me in both Lashon HaKodesh and in French, lacking only in his ability to pronounce the language as we do, because he was never able to hear the language. But I understood what he was saying based on the instruction of Jacob Pereira. And I watched in awe. And there's even a moment he relates that he had this humorous interaction where he pretended to sign language to the boy, and the boy was confused until Mr. Pereira explained that really the Chida doesn't know sign language. He's just trying to say hello. Sir Jacob Pereira, through his wisdom and his diligence, had discovered this thing, and it became such a great sight that the King of France himself wished to see this boy. The boy was brought to the King of France, and after experiencing the incredible communication that he was able to achieve, the king promised from his own treasury to support Jacob Pereira in his work of helping the deaf and mute. And he concludes this passage in the diary by saying, Baruch hachonein lo adam das. The Chida wasn't just taken by how cool it was that you could have a man spending his life teaching people who can't hear and can't speak, teaching them how to communicate. It's not cool. It's not a distraction from seeing godliness. It's Baruch Chonein Adam Das. It's a way of appreciating Hashem's world, seeing the expression of the human neshama in so many different facets and so many different experiences. We have to broaden. Broadening our construct of Avodas Hashem doesn't mean that we should learn less and go to the museum more. We should be learning as much as we possibly can. Broadening our construct of Avodas Hashem means that in all of the time and all of the interactions and conversations and experiences that I have outside of the Beis Medrash, try to make those experiences as much of a continuation of seeing the godliness within every person, within every neshama, within every noble thought and aspiration. And therefore, we're never mafsik mimishnaso. We're not stopping the learning, but we're always learning and appreciating the world around us. Shkoyach.